Roger Urwin of Towers Watson. Can you tell us something about the defining moments in the industry?
The industry is going through a lot of changes post the global financial crisis. The big features are, first of all, that the sort of geopolitics is changing big time. We actually have this movement from a unipolar situation, you could call it like a G1, to a G20 where it's all multipolar in nature. We have the financial system, going through a lot of changes as well. The financial system really has got elements of government change, regulations that are much more significant coming through. And we also have some sort of secular disorders in the background here to do with adverse demographics working their way through, particularly the developing countries. And also we have issues of resource shortage and resource depletion and potentially climate change, which will make longer term secular difficulties for investments going forward.
Okay, how will this present itself in trends towards the future in this business?
Well, I look at all of those as being kind of new and different and stretching our minds and our imagination and needing to adapt. And so from that point of view, what were the old strategies that kind of worked up until 2010, the next decade, people have to kind of re-educate themselves to the new world order. And those trends are, I think, difficult. And I think investment returns from here wouldn't look that strong necessarily because we have, I think, fairly difficult, imbalanced global economies. And developing countries, will clearly have difficulty keeping pace with past trends. But the emerging economies and the emerging wealth effects are probably offsets to that will make it not too bad.
Do you reckon that the recent crisis, the industry will head towards a more sustainable and stable direction?
Well, the word sustainable is kind of interesting because we're running very hard to kind of keep pace with some of those issues. And in particular, the pension systems across the world are getting rather stretched because they're in deficits and they're finding difficulty putting the requisite contributions in to make themselves fully funded. And so from that point of view, I find some elements of the pension system not that sustainable. So I'm a little bit pessimistic about the consequences for those funds, particularly those funds where the deficits are quite large. Now that's not an issue here in the Netherlands where I am, but it is an issue across a number of the other pensions markets.
So is there a learning curve in the industry at all?
Well, learning curve is, I think, something that the investment industry does quite well. It has an army of extremely committed and well-educated professionals, so it is able to learn. But I think maybe some of our behaviours are a little bit perhaps slow to pick up some of these changes, which I see as very far-reaching.
Towards the prevention of another crisis, do you think new regulation and government control will make a difference?
It's very interesting that regulation is working its way through very, very slowly. So most governments would say that the financial system is seriously messed up through 2009. And we were in a very bad state. It was touch and go at one or two moments whether or not we'd actually have a complete meltdown of the financial system. So governments recognise that, and they've kind of come together. They've both done national work on this, and they've done global work, through G20 and other agencies, and they are reaching the point of putting new regulations in place country by country. These regulations have been more in the banking sector than the investment industry, and the financial services sector hasn't been that much. But they are continuing. We haven't seen the end of it. Regulation will continue. It will always be one of those areas where regulation may carry unintended consequences. But I think we have seen that market fundamentalism, which is the philosophy that markets will find their way through, is probably flawed and not to be relied on, and we do need some sort of mixture of public policy and private markets to get us through the potential for another crisis.
So it has been shown that the market is not effective in that way. Do you think that regulation on the short term will become effective into preventing such events happening again?
I have to say that past track record of governments regulating effectively, not good. Have they learned lessons? I think I can only say the jury's out. I find your question very hard, I'm afraid. So we are looking out for good signs, and governments are certainly being measured about the way that they introduce new regulation. So I am actually arguing that we should have a degree more regulation than we have at the moment, because basically trust in the investment industry, has been diminished, and it can only be put in place, I think, with perhaps a stronger regulatory framework.
You just mentioned that trust has to be won again. Is coming to grip with the complexity of the industry and gaining their trust, is that manageable? Is that realistic at all?
Well, we are where we are. Basically, financial education across society isn't that strong. It's not one of those things that gets into school curricula across the world. So when we see it through that lens, individuals and consumers are very confused by financial products, and the investment industry tries, but I think doesn't succeed in explaining things simply. So to combat complexity, we have to have more simplification. We have to have governments playing a part in simplification, and investment providers themselves doing more to simplify their propositions. And if we get that, we would have more trust.
So gaining trust doesn't only have to come from the investment companies themselves, but it has to be viewed in a broader perspective, governments, schools, teachings.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That this is about the interconnectedness of all things, that we need to have a bunch of things come together to improve that trust. No single party was responsible for the breakdown of the trust in the first place. It wasn't wholly the fault of the investment industry, it was the consequence of many other factors. And just as there's no simple attribution of blame in one quarter, the solution will have to come from many quarters as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.